my dad found his biological parents, and it turns out they've been searching for him for 56 years. My dad, 56, was adopted at birth. He was raised in Eastern Canada and never really searched for his birth parents. The people who raised him are his parents to him and he loves them very much. They have always been amazing grandparents to my sister and I. All he had from his birth parents was a letter that told him he was born out of love, but they could not support him when he was born. So when my sister decided to get him a genetic test for Christmas, it was purely with the intention to find out what ethnicity we all are, and the thought of finding his birth parents didn't even cross our minds. Eventually, when we got his results, we were surprised to find the names of two people with perfect genetic matches to my dad. He had the option to reach out to them, so he wrote them each an email and just waited for their responses. Almost immediately, his biological dad, who I'll call Jim, responded. He said how excited and happy he was to have found my dad and how he had been looking for him for so long. My dad, who is usually an emotionally reserved man, was curled up on the couch grinning as he was texting Jim for the first time. I was still in shock from the news, but was so happy to see my dad, even happier than when I graduated uni. Soon thereafter, he also received a message from his biological mom, Debbie. By talking to them both, my dad learned the story of his birth, and I think that it's absolutely wild. Debbie is the daughter of an Australian mining engineer and they all moved to Canada for his work when she was in high school. Later on, they moved to the Midwest where she met Jim at the age of 17. They were high school sweethearts and were thinking of marriage after they graduated, but then Debbie got pregnant. This being the 60s, this was a huge deal. Her dad was furious and sent her back to Canada to give birth and arranged a private adoption as he knew of a couple who were trying to have a kid, my grandparents. Once she gave birth, she was able to let Jim know that she was being sent back to Australia. They never saw each other again for the next 40 years. Jim apparently was only able to move on once he received a letter over 5 years later from Debbie, saying that she got married. Eventually, he got married too, and they moved to the West Coast, but his wife got into a terrible car crash and lost the use of both legs and one arm, so they were never able to have kids. Debbie had 3 daughters in Australia, the oldest of which is 7 years younger than my dad. They saw each other for the first time around 12 years ago, as they reconnected on Facebook, and Debbie happened to be taking a trip to the west coast of America. Both Jim and Debbie had always wanted to keep my dad, and so they tried for decades to find him. But my province apparently is one of the hardest places in the world to find adoption information, especially since my dad only received his birth certificate at his baptism, so their names were not on it. Jim had essentially given up trying to find my dad until genetic tests became popular. He asked Debbie to take every single one, and he did the same, about 5 years ago, in the hopes that one day my dad would take one. When he received my dad's message, he immediately wrote to Debbie, "I found him." Since then, we have had several calls with Jim and his wife and they are absolutely lovely. We are their only family since they don't have kids and I couldn't be happier. At the end of the month, we'll be flying to the West Coast to meet them. It has been harder to talk to Debbie as Australia is so many hours ahead of us, but she also is so kind and an absolute joy to talk to. I haven't met my 3 new aunts yet, but apparently, one lives in London. It's crazy to think that I might have been within a few kilometers of her the few times I've visited. I also have 5 new younger cousins. A couple of them are huge fans of Japanese culture, so they're ecstatic to hear that they have half Japanese cousins. My mum is Japanese Canadian, so my sister and I are both half. We hope to visit them one day in Australia, but we might all meet up in Japan next year. I don't know how to end this. I am still processing everything. It's absolutely incredible to have my family grow so much, but also a little overwhelming. I'm so happy for my dad, Jim, and Debbie, and I'm so excited to get to know them better. Update. So, we just got back from visiting Jim and his wife, who I'll call Mary, on the West Coast, and it was one of the best experiences of my life. We spent a week in their city and got to experience so much with them. Our first time meeting them in person was very emotional and felt very surreal. We spent the whole day looking through my dad's and our old photos, basically catching Jim up on everything that he had missed over the past 56 years. We also got to see so many of his and Mary's old photos too, which was very cool. We went to a park near their house and on the walk, I heard Jim whisper "my son" with a massive smile across his face. Throughout the week, we explored their city, saw so many cool sights, and tried so much delicious food. Mary knows her city so well and it was great to see her favorite spots all around the city, from food carts to gardens to museums. We all went to an incredible Japanese-American museum and Jim and Mary absolutely loved it. They were very keen to learn about the internment during World War II and said that they knew a bit about it before, but now it feels so personal. We went on 2 hikes with Jim. Mary wasn't able to come because she was in a wheelchair. It's so cool to have such an active and outdoorsy grandfather who is able to go on such long hikes. He taught us some foraging tips and told us stories from when he used to camp for years on end. Both he and Mary are very spiritual, so he also told us great stories from meditation retreats they've done. He's even tried psychedelics, so he's definitely the cool grandpa. I won't go into precise details of the places we went, but it was great exploring such a cool part of the world with amazing people. We were all very sad when the trip was over and we had to leave. I've gained 2 new grandparents on the West Coast and I couldn't be happier. And they said that they've gained 2 grandchildren. I'm so glad that they see us as such. Mary told me her greatest regret in life was not being able to have children and grandchildren, but now she does. This has been such a transformative time in our lives and I think it's incredible just how many people are so much happier now because my sister just happened to get my dad a DNA test. This is just the beginning of our relationship with our new grandparents and I am so excited. Now we have to figure out a way to go to Australia to meet Debbie. Whenever that happens, maybe I'll make another update.